States across the U.S. Deep South are now racing to redraw their congressional district maps before midterm elections. Critics say the changes being made favor Republican candidates and leave black voters underrepresented. Recent Supreme Court decisions, including one this week concerning Alabama, have weakened the 1965 Voting Rights Act that required minority voters be taken into account when redrawing districts. Washington Bureau Chief Inez Pohl filed this report from Alabama.
And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. The many times that Dr. King would kiss me on my cheek before he would leave the mass meetings in Selma and tell me that he would return.
Sharon Webb Kreisberg was 7 years old when she joined hundreds of marchers in Selma, Alabama on March 7th in 1965. The events of that day became known as Bloody Sunday, one of the defining moments in the campaign to secure voting rights for Black Americans. And now she fears the rights they fought for are once again under threat.
When I first heard about what was going on with the Supreme Court ruling, I went into tears and I reflected on all of the blood, sweat, and tears and all those people who have died who were in that struggle back in the 60s. So I was hurt, like so many other people are hurt, because we can't go back. We can't go back, and we got to fight. We got to fight and fight again.
For many in Alabama, the memories of the civil rights movement are not confined to history books. A new Supreme Court ruling has reopened debates many believed had been settled decades ago. Sharon Webb Kreisberg is a regular in the Missionary Baptist Church in Montgomery. Today is Youth Sunday.
Some of us believe that it's all over. There's no more fight, that everything's equal, that everything's where it ought to be. But what we're looking at in these current conditions and these current times is that it's not what we thought it was.
At the center of the debate is how electoral districts are drawn, a process that can shape political power for years to come. 60 years ago, thousands of voting rights activists completed their march here at the Alabama state capitol. Their goal was simple: equal access to the ballot box. Today, the debate has shifted. The question is no longer who can vote, but how those votes are translated into political power and whether the way electoral districts are drawn can shape who governs not only Alabama, but the country as a whole. Every 10 years after the census, electoral districts in the United States are redrawn. Critics say politicians sometimes shape those maps to benefit their own party, either by concentrating opposing voters in a few districts or splitting communities apart to weaken their influence. The practice is known as gerrymandering. In Alabama, the fight centers on congressional districts with large black populations. Voting rights advocates argue those communities need enough voters in a district to elect candidates of their choice. Republicans argue districts should not be drawn primarily based on race. The Supreme Court's latest ruling could now reduce the number of majority black districts from 2 to 1. And because Alabama sends 7 members to Congress, even small changes to district boundaries can affect who holds political power in Washington. Republicans see the issue very differently. At a Republican gathering in Clanton, about an hour north of Montgomery, many argue the current maps place too much emphasis on race and not enough on the views of Alabama's voters.
Then what has happened over time, districts have been redrawn and redrawn to the point that now the Supreme Court has said, guys, you've gone too far the other way.
You know, we don't believe that our district lines should be based off race, and that was the argument that the court said, that we had to have at least 2 Democratic black districts and that's not constitutional.
Many Republicans also see the issue as one of political representation.
Alabama's a ruby red state, and I think we should reflect that in our districts.
What I do know is no voting rights are being taken away. Alabama's still holding the same standard. They're making sure that you show up with an ID, you have citizenship, you can vote in Alabama.
For Republicans, the issue is not voting rights. They argue every eligible voter can still cast a ballot. But for many black Alabamians, the debate is about political influence and who gets represented. On our way, we pass the Lowndes County Courthouse, a place that tells an important part of the story of voting rights here in the United States. Despite having a large black majority, most black residents here were effectively excluded from political power until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. After the Selma to Montgomery marches, communities like this became a kind of a testing ground for the new voting rights protections that reshaped the American South. For civil rights activists like Reverend Lawrence Wofford in Selma, the legacy of the Selma marches is still being tested today.
The reality of what Dr. King died for was to get us the right to vote. And unfortunately, too many of us don't vote.
But Wofford says today's debate goes beyond voter turnout.
Well, it's not the voting right. It's not a right. They're not moving the right to vote. They're moving it and making the vote that we cast in some ways ineffective or inefficient. What they're saying is we're going to split the districts so that it is more than likely that other people will be elected in those districts, and blacks will not have the power to be effective in the legislature, in the Congress, or wherever. Gerrymandering is another tool that that the folk in power use to accrue power to themselves and to extract power from those of us who sometimes seem powerless. Because when you remove people from the ability to elect some people that represent them, that's not equity. That has nothing to do with equity. That has to do with the extraction of power and accruing power to themselves.
Many believe the battles that played out on this bridge had long been settled, but for activists here, a new Supreme Court ruling has made the past feel present once again.
It's a much more refined racism, but it's still racism. It's still a matter of not wanting to share the power. We developed a much more sophisticated way of doing it. Your vote is your voice. Without your vote, you have no voice. Dr. King was positive, in spite of all. He said, I'm not turning back, I'm going forward.
Let's get more on this now with Lee Drutman. He's a political scientist and senior fellow at the think tank New America in Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us. Lee, many of those watching this program from outside the U.S. may not really understand what gerrymandering is. It's been described as politicians choosing their voters rather than voters choosing their politicians. Is that about right? Give us your thumbnail explanation.
Yeah, it's a little oversimplified, but broadly, it's a pretty good way of describing it. The thing that we do here in the United States that is somewhat distinct is, one, we use single-member districts with first-past-the-post elections, and two, we let state legislatures decide how to draw the lines by which those districts are drawn. So that, throughout the entire history of the U.S., frankly, has led to a lot of attempts to draw lines in particular ways, and this has ebbed and flowed throughout our history. The name gerrymander actually goes back to 1812, so this is a very old practice, but it has certainly hit a new low in the last year or so here in the United States, as our politics has just gotten nastier and nastier.
Okay, there's a partisan politics part of gerrymandering, and then there's a racial component in it too. Sometimes those who engage in the practice acknowledge that it's driven by party politics, but is it also used as a legal excuse to discriminate?
Well, it's hard to say because partisanship and race have been so entwined here in the United States because black voters vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. So Republicans, particularly in the South, have used gerrymandering to disenfranchise black voters, but they are also disenfranchising Democrats. So I think there is certainly some racial element to it, but it is also, I think, much more clearly a partisan element right now in this moment in the United States.
Okay, we've got this Supreme Court decision. Critics of that decision argue that it makes elections less fair for millions of minority citizens, that some votes will now count less than others. Is that the case?
Pretty much that's been the case for a lot of Americans voting in elections for quite a while now, is that most Americans don't live in districts that are competitive, and so their votes count less. What the new maps that have been enacted throughout the U.S. South in the wake of this voting rights decision do is they now make it harder for black voters in the South to elect candidates who they want because they've been spread out into different districts, which is what you can do if you have the power to draw maps however you want them to. So it disenfranchises a lot of black voters, disenfranchises a lot of minority voters, but it disenfranchises most Americans, frankly, who don't really get to vote in competitive elections.
So what are the main consequences, do you think, that Supreme Court decision is having? How will it impact the country long term?
Well, I think we already had a gerrymandering fire going on here in the United States. It began at the founding, but it became much more fiery in the last year or so as there have been states doing mid-district gerrymandering. I think this poured gasoline on the gerrymandering fire, and it is now really inflaming the country. So long term, I don't know. Maybe this is the thing that finally leads us to join most of the rest of the world and adopt a system of proportional representation, which would make gerrymandering obsolete. That's certainly my hope. But in the immediate term, it is just making U.S. politics nastier and more vitriolic.
Lee, thank you very much for your insights. That was Lee Drutman, political scientist and senior fellow at the New America think tank in Washington, D.C.